Alex, thank you also to Flyleaf Books for this. This is kind of an amazing. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, good. This is kind of a dream come true to be in this space.
I know. It never gets old, does it? It's awesome.
No, like your hometown crowd. Like this is amazing.
Well, I can just tell that everybody is mine on.
Yes.
Yes. I can just tell from the crowd that everybody is here to support you. And I was just saying, Libby knows everybody because I've already bumped into people I used to babysit for. And so this is so Chapel Hill that you have that moment. Where you say someone and you have like a complete history with them and everything.
Well, and I just want to acknowledge too that Sarah, like to be here with you is amazing. What a beautiful writer you are, and honestly, you inspired an entire generation of young readers.
Oh, well, thank you.
And
That's
I mean,
nice.
I think
It's true. Not tonight.
So I actually got a message from somebody that was a bookstagrammer directly to Instagram today.
Wow.
Who said, Sarah Dessen. And she lives in Maine.
And she lives in Maine. That's very nice. But this is about you. Let's focus on you. And I love this book, I have to say. I have family in Cape Cod. I grew up going to Cape Cod in the summers, and so I could sort of relate to the Maine thing and everything.
I don't think your mic is on.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Oh, it is.
It is.
I can turn it up though.
Okay.
If there's request.
Could be. I have bad luck with microphones. I really do. I want to be able to be heard.
Yeah, for those of us with soft voices.
Right, exactly.
We'll
Try now.
Is that a little bit better? Oh, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. So I think the first question that I wanted to ask as a reader is about your connection to Maine. Obviously, you have a connection here to Chapel Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of writing a book about Chapel Hill, what was it about Maine that really drew you? Because I feel like Maine is kind of a character in this book as well. So I'm just curious. I know you have a slideshow that's going here, so I feel like you can sort of jump off and explain that.
Sure, of course. Well, my training, I'm an art historian, so I'm used to having a screen up there so people don't look at me. They look at that. So a lot of the images that you're seeing here are photographs that were, the vintage ones were taken of a cottage that my parents owned when I was a child. That cottage was sold when I was a teenager, and when we bought it, it looked very much like the pictures that you're seeing here. The women who sold it to, the women had died who owned and built the cottage in 1913, had passed away, and it had gone to the estate of their nephew who sold it to my parents. And they didn't want anything. And when I say they didn't want anything, we have their photograph albums. So we adopted them. And we did call them the Misses. They appear in the book. Anyway, and you will see pictures of them, their friends, their pastimes. That cottage was very much a source of comfort and joy for me as a child. And to this day, it really formed my connection to the state then, and my fascination with its landscape and the seascape. The other photographs that you see that are not vintage, and I think you can probably clearly see the difference. A lot of them are mine and some of them were my brother's.
Very cool. I think that's awesome. Well, and also, like I said, Maine as a character, I think you have the weather, which is a big part of,
You can't be in Maine without the weather.
You can't be in Maine without the weather. I have a lot of relatives in Maine who are always trying to get me to move to Maine. I'm like, I would die. Like the Chapel Hill winters are hard enough for me. But another question I had was, there's some magical realism in this book, and I'm curious how much of that you planned ahead of time, or if that is something, like you said going into this book, that this is something that I want to incorporate, or if it's something that sort of built as you were writing, because I'm always curious about like how the process works.
Well, I experienced Maine as a magical place,
Right.
In general, and Maine is a place where people talk about ghosts like they're right around the corner. And I tell a story, I told it on the radio yesterday, so forgive me for those of you who heard the interview, about having dinner at a friend's house, and it's a very old house. It was in their family for many generations, and it's a little bit falling into the ocean now. And I asked the hostess during dinner, "Oh, is there a ghost here?" And she said, "Oh yeah, it's Uncle George." So, and that's my experience of ghosts in Maine. And of course, now I hear nothing but ghost stories. People like to share them with me. I will say in this book, the ghosts are not, it is not necessarily a ghost story, they're just present. And I say that because I had a review once that said, "Oh, I thought this was a ghost story, not enough ghosts, 2 stars."
No.
So I preface that. The magical realism, I also, I was an English major undergrad, and I was utterly enchanted with the work of the South American writers.
Right.
So, and their incorporation of that as sort of a normal part of life stuck with me. And so I think it's just present in the way I tend to think about writing and the world.
I think you balance it really well too, because I think sometimes magical realism, when you're writing a literary novel like this, it can sort of take the reader off. But I really liked how you were able to balance it and sort of use it to sort of brighten the edges and sort of make us wonder, but it wasn't so distracting from the story. Because you have a lot happening here. You know,
Yes.
As an author, I'm always impressed with how people can organize their plots so well and have. So I'm just curious, like Gwen's story. Who's the narrator, and we sort of come across her when she's not at the best time of her life.
No, she's lost everything.
She's lost everything, which you love a story that begins with somebody losing everything. So I'm curious, what was that based on? I don't want to be that person because I hate it when I'm writing people like, well, is this based on a real story? Did this really happen to you? But I am interested in like where it came from.
Well, the book sort of began essentially after a meeting with my agent, who had said, because although it's presented as my first book, and most writers will know this is not my first book. This is just the first book to get published. So there was another book that my agent, it didn't sell. So my agent met with me at lunch, and he's very cheerful, right? What's next? And I was kind of like, well, so I started talking about another idea, and he said, after that. And I was like, oh, well, I'm thinking of that as my love letter to Maine. And he said, that one, you're writing that one. And I was like, well, I've got nothing. I have no outline, I got nothing. And he said, it doesn't matter, just go home, just start writing and write a chapter or 2, see what happens. So I went back and I started writing about the landscape and how I wanted the book to feel. And all of a sudden, there was this character who was driving across the Piscataqua Bridge, which is the bridge that separates New Hampshire from Maine. It's a very distinctive bridge for those of you who've been over it, and you're nodding because it's very special. She was driving over it in the middle of the night, and this was a character who had premature streaks of gray in her hair and bags under her eyes. And I thought, oh, wow, who are you? Something terrible has happened to you, So it was sort of, that's how the story sort of came. And then I just kept on writing, and True Confessions, and I know there are writers in the room besides Sarah, and you're going to start shaking your head when I say this, I wrote the entire thing sort of stream of consciousness. Very bad idea.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it worked, obviously.
Oh, no.
Well, that's the nice thing, is nobody has to see your drafts. Nobody has to, that you just pray somebody doesn't break into your, like Anne Lamott says, somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the night and looks at your drafts and you're horrified.
Yeah, no, I had an excellent editor.
Right. Well, I can't remember who said it. It's some famous, I heard Kate Gibbons say it a million years ago. But she said, all books begin, or stories begin, with someone takes a trip or a stranger comes to town, Mm-hmm. But Gwen isn't really a stranger. I think that's what's interesting. She comes in, and she's honestly, like, my impression of Mainers, we talked about this earlier on the phone, is that they're not the most welcoming. So, or they can not be the most welcoming if you're sort of rolling in from somewhere else, and
you're from away.
You're from away, exactly. So is that a choice that you actively made? I mean, obviously you needed it for the story, but if she had just been coming from, where she was coming from, without the connections, it would have been a much different story.
Oh yeah, it would have been much harder for her. She had a childhood connection to this place. And I gave her the same cottage that was our cottage. it was unwinterized, and so Gwen is going to have to learn how to piece her life back together in an unwinterized cottage on the coast of Maine. So, which presents, some challenges. Anyways, so I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I was talking about being a stranger versus.
Oh yeah. So she, because she had been there as a child, as a summer person, she had other friends. Some of whom were summer people, some of whom were full-time residents, and she encounters all of them very quickly when she arrives, and they mostly expect her to be the same person that she was. The reason she has not been back in over 23 years is because there was a tragedy that happened in that house that has really scarred her and made it difficult for her to even consider coming back, even though this was a place that she loved dearly when she was little, because of the loss. And it's quite explicit in the beginning, so this is not a spoiler. Her sister dies, and this is a death for which she feels responsible. And so she's going to have to overcome a lot of old feelings and new feelings in the middle of this journey that she's on. Yeah, so she's not quite from away. She knows the grocery store owners and the bookstore owner, and they recognize her and remember her. And of course, they would remember her because they were present for this tragedy as well.
And she does form a community with them, and I love all the stuff about her sort of battling this house and the winterizing, and she ends up having to stay there when it's very, very cold, because I think there's a really nice parallel there between sort of the battles that are going on within her and literally to keep herself alive, in this cold and unforgiving climate. And to get through the winter, which we could say like the dark winter of the soul. My dad was a Shakespeare professor. So, but one thing I wanted to say that I thought was really interesting is houses as characters, which, Periwinkle is a big character, but everybody is sort of represented by, Gwen has this house that needs a lot of work, right? And Hugh has this beautiful house that
is immaculate.
Yes. And, it doesn't really represent anything. And then I don't want to ruin too much, but there's a young girl who comes into it who's sort of creating her own home out of the wilderness.
Yeah.
So I know that you started off with the idea of Periwinkle and everything.
Yes, I did.
I'd love for you to talk about sort of how houses represent people and the way that you use that.
Oh, that's so interesting. No one's asked me that question.
Oh, good.
I like that a lot. So yeah, and actually also Stephen and Jess's house is quite interesting. It's perched on the edge of a cliff, and it has an inlaid compass rose in the foyer. I do think of architecture as being places that shape character. Right? They inform the way you respond to space and the way you live in them. And it's something I think about a lot. As an art historian, when I was first working on my master's, I was very interested in Gothic and Romanesque architecture and the sculpture. And those places have a very clear effect on your body when you walk inside, right? That kind of gasping feeling that you have when you look up into the vaults. So, it's a baby.
No, it's your baby.
It's my baby. It's my daughter's baby. So he's having a late afternoon fussies. I wasn't conscious of the fact that I was doing that. It's just something I do think about, and I do think a lot about. I do use a lot of my training as an art historian to write. People are sort of like, "Oh, this is such a disconnect." To go from being an art historian to a writer, and I'm like, not really, you're asking the same questions, what is it, where did it come from, who is it made for, who's going to use it, and those are all important things when you're trying to create a new world, which is essentially what every novel is.
Right. Well, I think the house thing is just very interesting because it's another way to show the characters, and I think we become very much like the structures where we are, and our personalities are all within them, especially if you have like family houses and stuff. It's sort of, you can never escape the past. That's actually the way I feel about my family houses. And I mean, I grew up here in Chapel Hill, so I drive around, and I was saying to these people, like, I can't drive past anything without thinking about, when I was there and all those years ago and everything.
Yeah.
I really need to move. I think. I really do, but I just haven't yet, and now it seems like it's too late. But I wanted to go back to the teenage girl. Well, I'm just drawn to teenage girl stories. Anyway, but I do want to talk, not to give away too much, but, Gwen does sort of forge this relationship with this younger girl, and I'm curious, like, how much of that you meant to be sort of a parallel that Gwen was there as a teenager and her own experiences.
Yeah, that was quite deliberate, actually, because the question I began with, so in my family, my mother lost a sister when she was very young, and I have seen my mother was much younger than Gwen when her sister died. But so I grew up seeing that kind of scar and how that can impact your life. And I wanted to answer a question of how can someone recover from something like that, right? It's a wound that has a hard time healing, right? So I had another character who has a different kind of wound. And yes, and she's a wild thing,
right.
She's a difficult, complicated character.
Right.
So.
Well, and I think it's such a nice parallel because, you can weave Gwen's story in with this younger girl, and sort of, I think sometimes it's like a mirror. You see, looking at somebody, you can sort of see yourself more clearly, which I thought was very cool. And this is a question I always like to ask authors. What is something that you would like for all of us to know about this book that maybe we wouldn't know?
Well, I get a lot of questions about Anna Vale is the name of the woman for whom the town is named. So, and I wrote her legend. It's not in the book. It's one of the things that got cut. The original manuscript was like 120,000 words, y'all. Way too long for a novel. And that I loved actually writing that piece of it because I wanted to write about a strong woman and someone so Anna Vale was a lifesaver. She lived in a lighthouse and she was known throughout the state of Maine. Of course, this is all fiction, right? For being the lifesaver that pulled more men out of the water than anyone else. And it was based in part on a novel that I read as a child that actually came out of this cottage. And the title of the book was Periwinkle. And it was written in the 1930s, and it's got very antiquated prose. It's a lot of, oh, hark. But I loved the story, and it was a story of a young girl who's raised in a lighthouse, and she learns how to life save from her adoptive father. But in that version, she dies when she falls in love with a man who abandons her. And I wanted to make this character like big and powerful and strong, and so I wrote it sort of differently. And she does fall in love with someone, and she is abandoned by him, but that's not why she disappears. She disappears mostly because the need for her life saving is gone. In Maine, which was a huge thoroughfare through the 19th century, those shipping lanes were essentially dissolved once the railroad took place, so they didn't need them to transport goods anymore, those big old schooners.
Right.
And when you drive, we still spend time in Maine. It's much further north than where this cottage was. When you drive up through towns like Searsport, and you see those lovely old captain's houses that have been turned into B&Bs or whatever, but it's definitely a depressed area. It's not, and at one time, this was a booming economy, right? And it went away, like a lot of the mill towns too in the interior of Maine. I mean, we've seen a lot of that in North Carolina.
Right, definitely.
Anyway, so this is the backdrop for Port Anna. I also had this question, like what would a town be like if you named it for a woman instead of a man? And people don't tend to ask me that question, but it is one that I thought about a lot, So this kind of warm embrace of that community. It is in part my experience of Maine, but it is also this kind of intellectual game I was playing. So.
I like that. I'm going to consult my notes again. I was charmed by the love story in this book because it was not your typical swoony, I mean, I was at my biggest failure as a person who like is in conversation is I give away too much of the book, so I'm trying not to do that. But maybe you can talk a little bit about the love story and how it isn't sort of slow to come together, and then the character himself lets you give away as much as you want to give away.
She's talking about a very, very attractive Argentinian artist.
See, I didn't want to say that. I didn't let her say it.
He shows up quite early, actually, and they have a very strong attraction to each other. But he is not interested in any kind of conventional relationship. And as it turns out, neither is she. But it's, it takes a while for that to unfold. But he's, yes, he's very charming. He says some things to her that she needs to hear, too. So, the work that he makes came entirely out of my imagination.
Right.
But one of my artist friends recently was like, I really like that project. I think I'm going to try it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I was going to ask about there is a lot of art in this book. There's his work, and then there's the big piece of art that's on Gwen's wall that ends up being, a big part of the story, and sort of the ongoing stuff that she and the husband of, I'm blanking on the guy, that they end up doing a lot of research into the houses and stuff and everything. So do you think that's because of your connection to art history, or do you think that that's something that would have been there otherwise?
No, it's probably my training, but I'm drawn to imagery,
right.
And I will say the misses, our real misses, were also painters, and my mother still has one of those paintings in her apartment, and there was no painting of a granite rock, right. But I made that up, but yeah. But it's, I think a lot through objects and art objects in particular. So yes, that was, yeah.
Yeah, you have a lot of moving pieces in this book, and I think you pull it all together very well at the end. Which
Thank you, Tim McCall.
I know,
my editor.
That's where the editor comes in usually is, like you said, if you have like this huge draft, and I know that there were days probably where you were ready to crawl under your desk and just give up because it's just, yeah.
How am I going to bring this home?
Yeah, exactly. My friend Libby Buck said, who's landing this plane? How are we going to do this? So maybe you could talk a little bit about your writing process, like how, again, like it could be anything from like what your schedule is like. This is what I find people are interested in as people who are not writers, or they are writers and they want to compare, what your process is, what kind of schedule you keep, and also like do you start at the beginning and build from that? You said you do a lot of stream of consciousness, but
yes, now I make outlines. I'm pretty linear, so I like to start at the beginning and move all the way to the end. But I have learned in this particular book how to put things together in scenes, and so I had an experience at a residency last January where I wrote just a bunch of scenes because I knew that this is for the next book. So I knew those scenes were going to show up at some point, and I wasn't sure where they were going to go. So that was the first time, though, that I've ever done it that way. And schedule, schedule, I write when I can, and I try to write every day. I have figured out a way so that I can even write on an airplane because my life is too chaotic, really, to say, oh, I'm going to get up every day and write from 6 to 8. I really admire those people who do, but I need a lot of coffee. I'm not an early morning person. So I do better in the afternoon, and by the time you're in the afternoon, like there's so many other things
Right.
breathing down your neck.
And I think as a writer, you just have to figure out what works for you, because what works for somebody else won't necessarily, work for you. And that's why I like the question so much, because I'm always curious. Like, I always want people to tell me how hard it is for them, because it's really hard for me. It makes me feel better. So the question is usually all about me.
Writers do a lot of laundry and household chores, trying to avoid sitting down at the desk.
Exactly.
It's so hard.
Yeah. All of my cabinets are very organized. My book may be a big mess, but do you have like a writing community, like a writer's group or something? Because I know a lot of people, have people that they share their work with.
I have a writing partner who we've been writing together for over a decade.
Wow.
When I first realized this is what I really wanted to do, I joined a meetup, and the rest of the group dissolved, right? And so Alvin and I have been writing together. They write YA sci-fi, so absolutely different, but extraordinarily plot driven, which is really helpful for me because I can go off on a tangent. And it's been great. That is a really sustaining relationship for me. Every 2 weeks we meet via Zoom for an hour, and we've shared work and critique it. So, and then I have I'm very, very fortunate when my book was still in production with Simon & Schuster, one of the other authors whose book was also coming out in the summertime contacted everyone else whose book was going to be released in the summer between May and the 1st of September. And there were probably 15, and of those 15, about a dozen said, oh yeah, I'd love to be in touch. And we meet every other week, and we have shared all kinds of information about the publishing journey, and especially about how to market your book. Right, because that's the piece that even Simon & Schuster, a lot of it falls on the writer's shoulders. So, the other writers in here are nodding.
Yeah. And just because you're good at writing doesn't necessarily mean you're good at promoting or you're good at social media, or, I think some of the best writers I know are so antisocial, they don't do well with people. That's why they're good writers. But they're not going to jump on, Instagram. And I think there's so much more pressure now. I mean, even when my first books were coming out, I'm dating myself, but there was no real social media. There was just you going to the bookstore. And I think now it's like, it's not enough to write a really good book. You have to promote that book, and you have to make TikToks about that book, and you have to, so personally, I just sound like I'm grumpy. Just tell people to get off my lawn, and I write for teenagers, so it's, it's even worse because I've just had to sort of give up. I'm never going to catch up with what, they're wanting to do.
No, and TikTok.
Yeah. Well, and I think it doesn't work. Well, the best advice I've gotten from a publicist is don't do things that don't come naturally to you, because that comes across, if there's something that you enjoy doing in terms of promotion, like you were saying, you like to go and like you've done these radio shows and you've, talked to people about the architecture and everything, like do that, because that's where your enthusiasm comes out. But don't necessarily feel like you have to go on TikTok and dance. God help us all about dancing, well, we are going to take questions here because I always think that's the most fun part. But before we do that, we're going to do a quick lightning round, which I warned her that we were going to do this. And this is just, for fun and just off the top of your head. Okay. What is your favorite place in Maine? If you have to pick a specific place.
The rock in front.
Oh.
Oh, okay. The
Here.
battery's dead.
Take one.
The rock right in front of my house.
Oh, we'll see. I like that. And then for fair use, what is your favorite thing in Chapel Hill? What's your favorite place in Chapel Hill? And you are answering this question in front of a lot of locals, so be very careful what you say.
Oh, I love. Okay.
I actually really love that whole lawn area in front of Wilson Library. There's something about it, and having been a grad student there, walking across it, you especially the beginning of the semester where we are right now, you're like, ooh, there's so much to learn. It's so exciting. You know, you're not beaten down by exams yet.
Yeah.
And I still get that buzz when I walk. I love campus.
Yeah. Campus it is very beautiful. I have to say, I was at Northwestern this summer because my daughter was in a summer program there, and my husband and my daughter kept saying, "This is so much prettier than UNC," and I was like, "Blasphemy! No, it is not. Like nothing is more beautiful than UNC." But I'm a little bit. Okay, so because you are partially a New Englander, and this may be the stupidest question in the world, but do you have thoughts on Bill Belichick? I'm just curious because a lot of people in New England feel very strongly about the Patriots. Now, I don't know if that's you, but we do have this New Englander now very front and present here in our little southern town.
Large in front.
Thank you. So do you have thoughts? I understand if you totally don't.
I'm not a football fan. That's
Okay.
a general rule.
Not a football fan. Okay.
No, actually, I have a friend here who loves going to the football games, and she would sometimes ask me if I wanted to go with her, and I said, "Can I talk?" And she said no, and I'm like, "Nope, not going." So,
Well, I felt like I had to ask just because it was, it's a New England thing.
Yeah.
So, okay. Have you ever seen a ghost
Seen a ghost?
or
No.
interacted with a ghost?
Yes.
Oh, do tell.
yeah, the misses they were ghosts in our house as a
Right.
child, and yes, and you would sometimes hear them. So, but they weren't scary. It
Right.
wasn't frightening, at all. It was just they were just sort of there.
Right.
Yeah, and I've been in houses. Actually, I went into a house in Hillsborough. Oh my gosh, a couple of years ago, and I turned to the real estate agent and said, I think this house is haunted, and she goes, yeah, that's what they say. It was just a feeling I got, so,
Right.
but I didn't see anything, no, just sort of felt it.
Just a feeling.
Mhm.
Okay. So if you had, this is like, would you rather?
Okay.
Would you rather be stuck in a Maine winter or a Chapel Hill summer?
I actually think those two things are the same.
There are both times when you want to run to your car,
Right.
and you don't want to be outside very much, The difference, of course, in Maine is that you can't, when it's really gross and really, really cold, like there's a solid chance you probably shouldn't be driving.
Right.
Or at least I shouldn't be driving.
Right.
Because I didn't grow up in that kind of weather. And here, at least, you can drive away from, I don't know, maybe you can get to the mountains or something, but it's, yeah. I think of them as the same in a way.
Well, I think that's why a lot of people leave from here and go to Maine. Like, is that what you do when you go? Do you go in the summers or?
Yeah, we're usually there in, late spring, early summer, and, come home reluctantly in September.
Yeah. And it's still hot. Still hot in September. We've had some unseasonable. Okay, and this is just a question that, wait, before that one. Okay, what was your favorite part of publishing this book? And then what was your least favorite part? And that can be also the writing of it.
Okay.
No, this is my favorite part.
Oh.
I actually said, I had a very wise uncle who was a minister who passed away a while ago, but he used to say, life is going to take you places you can't imagine. And that was what has been on my mind ever since this book was published. I just could not have imagined this. Because I wrote for myself. I wrote a book I wanted for me. And, so when people read it and show up and say kind things, it's overwhelmingly wonderful. So what was my least favorite part? Copy editing.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that.
I hated copy editing. I wanted to reach through the manuscript and strangle the person on the other end.
We talked about
Yeah,
that.
we did on the phone.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, that part's really hard.
Yeah.
They ask really crazy questions. Like one of the sentences I thought was the most poetic, and I was so proud of it. He wrote, "I don't understand this." Yeah, I was like, tough, it's staying in.
And that's the thing with track changes, which I feel antiquated when I have to use track changes, but you can leave a snarky comment. It used to be you'd have to put your own post-it on there and, be like, "Ugh." But I always think it's good to have the copy editor because they catch all of the little things. Yeah. it's always the timeline stuff that trips me up, and I'm like, why? No one is going to be reading this book with a calendar next to them. So, actually, this was just so frustrating. So we bonded over that. Okay, and my last question, because this is just what I always want to ask everybody. There is a fair amount of banana bread in this book, but I always like to ask somebody, what is your favorite breakfast food?
Granola. That's very Maine.
My husband makes it.
Oh, that's nice.
He makes very delicious granola.
All right, that's a good question. All right, we have time for some questions, right, Alex? Okay. Would anybody like to ask Libby a question? I know you guys are all her friends.
No pressure.
No pressure. All we need is one person to jump out into the void. Oh, good job.
Thank you.
So I haven't read the book yet, and I'm very excited. But I am also very intrigued by Anna. What was the legend?
Anna Vale.
I think that needs to be a book.
Oh, well, it will show up again. So the next project is still set in Port Anna, and it features this girl character who shows up who's so complicated. I had a lot of questions about her when I finished writing this one. And so, yes, there will be more Anna Vale that will show up again. But thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I know it's another genre, but Port Anna sounds like a Netflix series to me.
I think that would be really lovely and fun, but not. In some contexts, I get. There are some of those series that are so.
Bad.
Yeah. Well, predictable. And there's a lot about this book that I think of as being unconventional. And I would love, if it were ever to be made into any kind of series, I would love to retain that part of it.
I think it's often what is so mystical and what makes something so unique on the page is the first thing to go.
Yeah. I'm scared they'll take the misses out too.
Yeah.
And people have really bonded with them, and that, what, honestly, you asked me what my favorite thing, it has been really lovely to hear people's responses to that,
right,
to them, because they have no family, they're long gone, and it's a way of keeping them alive.
Very nice. Another question?
Oh, yeah, hey, Mary. This is one of my former art history professors, the very talented and brilliant Mary Pardo.
Libby, you've just taken the ground right from under me. So now I actually wanted to comment on the misses, because I thought that was one of the really lovely parts of the book, was the way you actually, I loved it that there was no woo about them at all. Mm-hmm. Their presence was very nicely rendered just as a sound phenomenon, as an auditory,
yeah.
So that it could be explained away, but in fact it had a kind of consistency that made it possible to interpret, so that you could actually read their moods and so on, just from the fact that they could be heard, but not, because there was no speech or anything like that. So I liked that a lot. I thought that really
so
worked.
glad.
And I thought it was consistent throughout the book, that there was this sort of other pair of characters that were necessarily part of the narrative weave. I have to tell you, I have heard stories about ghosts in Hillsborough.
Yes.
Martha Witt, who is also a writer and the daughter of a former deceased professor at Duke, they lived in a house that was haunted back up there.
Did they see it? The presence? No.
They did see it, as a matter of fact.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was a child drowned, but in a well.
Ooh.
Yeah. No, so Hillsborough is haunted.
Then I feel very much at home.
Question?
If there's time.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Go
Is there
right ahead.
somebody else in that?
There's several others, so I'll start with you.
Krista Tippett on Being always starts her interviews with, is there something in your childhood, your basic religion or your faith or whatever that informs? And I'm just wondering if there's anything about your childhood that informed your desire for writing or telling stories or.
Oh, gosh. Well, some of my earliest memories are, sort of writing and drawing and reading. I read voraciously. I was labeled biggest bookworm for 3 years in a row when I was in elementary school. So I suppose that was part of it. I also went to Catholic school, and there's mysticism, right, embedded in that, that has stuck with me too, so informed a lot of it. Robin had a question.
I was just curious, did you get any push from either your publishers or your editor to like make this a commercial book? Like, okay, we need a new beach book, like you need to have these elements in it. Do you need to add those?
Mm-mm. They didn't, none of that. They did say this is a summer read. And I was like, that's weird because 2/3 of the book is in the winter. But I completely understood why they said that, you know, because it takes place in a coastal town, and you know. So, but no, none of. I never got any of that kind of commercial, pressure. Yeah.
So you have another project. How far along are you in that project? Is it hard to come back after you've written and published this and then talk about this, but you're working on another project?
It's not as hard as you would think because it's also set in Port Anna. And so that helps me a lot. I mentioned my Simon & Schuster cohort of authors, and this is something that we talk about a lot about is the next novel, like how do you come to that? And for some of them, it's a clean slate. And so they're starting over from scratch and they're having a really hard time. And I'm embarrassed to say it wasn't hard for me to pick up the thread.
Don't be embarrassed.
So, I was happy not to have to leave Port Anna because I've now created this like town that gives me so much joy. And so, you know.
Will we see some of the characters?
You'll see most of them.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Have another question.
Sure.
So was it your decision to stay in Port Anna, or?
My agent suggested it. Well, actually, when this was on submission, this book was on submission, he said, I feel like this ought to be a series. Can you do the next one in Port Anna too? And I was like, yes. Yeah. You know, I had to think about it for a minute, but yeah, and it was. And then when this character showed up, like as I said, she was so compelling to me.
Hi. Can you say something about, I don't know, being a late bloomer, what it means? It's very inspiring for you to have your first literary success
at 25.
You're not.
Like you.
I think that's 40. It's very inspiring, and I think we all have some passion project that we haven't pursued, and you have.
I don't know that I could have done this work in my 20s or 30s. You need a very thick skin. As I said, the book that didn't sell, it went through 7 revisions and then didn't sell.
And when was that, or?
2020?
Oh,
2019.
very recent.
Yeah. So, I'm not done with that book yet. I'm going to wrestle it to the ground.
It's personal now.
Yeah. And actually, all this cohort, we all have that book, and we refer to it as the albatross. And, I'm going to tame it. It's the last thing I do. But, I could not have done that in my 30s. It would have been way too hard for me. And so it feels like it's the right time, I guess. I had a question from a radio show there, the producer actually jumped in and he was like, so Simon & Schuster, how'd that happen? And I was like, I don't know. I do know my agent sort of like put it in front of them, but they said yes, which is the craziest thing on the planet. And I don't even know what to make of it, right? But some of that's just lightning striking, right? And I happen to have an editor that really likes ghosts. So and he likes quirky books. So, I don't know. I will say I find it the most rewarding work I've ever done. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Cool.
if we kept everybody on.
Anybody last question? All right, let's
Oh,
go.
one more
Oh,
from
sorry, go
Susan.
The genesis of Shania.
Oh. Gosh. Well, I knew from the beginning that there was going to be this other character that was going to show up and help Gwen figure out her life, right? And I'd had this idea in my head about what she was going to be like, you know? And so when she finally showed up, and I'm writing that chapter, and the first words out of her mouth, I was like, oh boy, you're not at all what I thought you were. Super complicated, and anyway, and you know, not at all predictable. And so in some ways she showed up for me in the same way that Gwen did. It's just an organic thing. And I know authors say this all the time, that you know, you're writing and the characters show up, and sometimes people who have never written, it sounds mystifying. And the only thing I can say is that it is, and it happens, and it's a really beautiful thing when it does. You know, you suddenly have these friends that are you but not you, you know?
What are whoopie pies?
Whoopie pies, and everybody has to have one, okay? They're back there, they come in all kinds of flavors. They come from a store in in Maine, they're everywhere. They're in the gas stations, they're in the grocery stores. Everybody has a whoopie pie. And sometimes, you know, I really would not advise getting one from the gas stations, they're gross. But the ones there, these are really good, and they come from a place in Bangor called Bangin' Whoopie.
Great name.
Anyway, we got a ton of them. So seriously, take one, take two, take some home to kids, you know, significant others, you know. Anyway, please do. That's a whoopie pie is cake, and on the interior is icing, essentially. So the traditional is chocolate cake and like marshmallow fluff. These do not have marshmallow fluff.
Well, let's give Libby a big that they didn't want to ask in front of everybody, which is totally understandable, that Libby will be around and she will be happy to answer your question. Or sign your book.
Or sign your book if I didn't get to it before. If I didn't see that.
Oh,
thank you.
Yes. Well, there's one over there.
Yeah.